Man.
It's showtime, baby.
There we go.
Well, John and I were looking at the same story this week. Incidentally, we were looking at the microplastics, and I think it'd be good to field it to the panel, and we can talk about it, at other time as well, John. So to our esteemed panel, I know Jay mentioned that microplastics, I think what I heard Jay said is that oil is an organic molecule, and as such, it may have a tendency to react. And I just wondered, is there any starting with Jay and maybe others too, is there any knowledge about what those might be doing to our brains, perhaps our EEG?
So I have an avocation, but I have a vocation in neuroscience. My avocation is environmental. And microplastics end up being reactive enough when they're small enough, especially. And if your community has chlorinated water, you're basically going to also have chloroform. Now, you can't quit chlorinating the water because you're going to end up with coliform, not chloroform. Chloroform ends up forming when you get any organics in the water stream. And the chlorine ends up being a very reactive molecule. It's there to kill off organic live critters, but it forms chloroform when exposed to anything. Methane, basically anything that's organic is going to end up breaking down, and you end up with interactions with chlorine. And chlorinated hydrocarbons, name one that's safe. There aren't any. DDT, well, I don't think that went over very well, did it? So and where do you find microplastics? Everywhere. And you find them in rain. You find them everywhere. And your polyester, when you wash it, sheds microplastics. So we are surrounded by it. You're full of it, and it's not necessarily a safe thing to have. So,
okay.
All right, can I jump in real quick on the plastic side of things? The problems with plastic, it's the petroleum. And doesn't petroleum mess up the brain, Jay? Haven't we talked about that?
Well, petroleum ends up being the source of the hydrocarbon in plastics. However, plastic material can be formed from other organic material as well, but it's so easy to make with oils, basically, that's the polyesters. And oil companies are old across the table from me, negotiating, not partners, but on the other side of the table, negotiating for benefits for the community. And the oil company in the town next to the town I lived in, less than a mile and a half away, ended up dumping 250 plus tons of toxic waste on the town I lived in. And although it's how we found my brain tumor, so I owe my life to that toxic waste, they still made 1,000 person in a 3,000 person town quite ill. And they saved me, but they made a lot of people quite ill. And it was a $300 million settlement, but it was essentially a negotiated total, and they ended up having to go through a judge panel to end up seeing who got how much of it. So it was an interesting negotiation.
Hi, Kelsey. Hi, Craig. Welcome back. Welcome back to the party. Joy, what did you have in your laundry list there? I thought you had a couple things that you wanted to cross off, or are you just noodling?
Oh no, I'm fairly purposeful. One of the things that I'd like to spend some time with, to be helpful to new people who are questioning it is to suggest questions that they would ask the providers when they're calling them and saying, what is your feedback? What would it do for me?
Love it.
It's something that I get all the time. You know, I'm sure we all do. We get phone calls and saying, and it's very clear that the people don't know what to ask. You know, one of the common questions, what kind of equipment do you use? And I'm like, what do you care?
Yeah. Oh, I'm right with you. Let's just, if
Is that your
everybody's
closing statement?
jump right on in.
So I have 9 questions that I've sort of vetted. I suggest people say, how long have you been doing neurofeedback?
Yeah.
Right. And when they say, well, you know, if they said 1 year, I'm like, okay, we all had to start someplace. But if you've only been doing it for a year, do you have a mentor that you contact frequently and you can run your cases by? So that's fair, right? Do you do neurofeedback full-time or part-time? What percentage of your time is doing neurofeedback? Because if I've been doing this for 10 years and I only see 5 people a week, that's a different experience level, right? I mean, all I do is neurofeedback. So until recently, I was working 6 days a week, full-time neurofeedback. That experience falls a little differently. What age groups do you usually work with, right? Do you use QEEG findings? Do you use a symptom-based process to create protocols, or do you blend Q results with the symptom and behavioral? How much experience do you have doing neurofeedback with whatever I have wrong with me, right? Because if I'm calling somebody and all they have experience in 10 years of experience is ADD, and I've got other problems, you're probably not my practitioner. So I tell people, ask them, what kind of success have you had with people who present with similar difficulties? Are you comfortable? Are you going to be comfortable working with my therapist? If you're not a therapist, if you're not combining those two, can arrangements be made for you two to share what you're doing along with me? You know, people tend to benefit from collaborative efforts. Can you talk a little bit about what you would consider a successful outcome? You know, I've talked to a lot of providers, and the answer to this question I thought was going to be pretty obvious, and it was anything but. The answers ranged anywhere from, well, if anything is even a little bit better than when they came into my office, that's a success. Yeah, I was kind of surprised by that one. Up until we can get a normal Q and, you know, and all the symptoms are gone. It's like, there's a huge spectrum of possible answers on that. So I'd like to know what you think is success. And can you give me any reason why you might be choosing the equipment that you're choosing? You know, is there something to do with the methods that meets well? Why have you chosen that? That's what I have to start with. You know, they don't.
Joy, can we jump in a little bit on like the difference between methods, equipment, programs? Because that one's really confusing. Because I just realized I went, but then you know, some of the push button programs, maybe you kind of do want to know what quote unquote equipment is. So does anybody want to take that on, the difference between methods, equipment, and programs?
Well, the one thing you'll notice I gave 2 questions there, right? About the equipment to start with. But then this question, I think kind of addresses that, right? It's like, can you explain why you're using the equipment you're using, which kind of does come into your method and so forth.
And the answer should not be because I don't know how to read raw EEG.
Well, and maybe that's part of it too. It's like, and if you get these kind of answers, you should be alarmed and say, thank you very much, goodbye. Right.
Yeah.
Hey, it's back to school season, and we talked about this on the regular show last week. Is everybody's business picking up with the kids coming in, or we're not there yet?
It takes a little bit of time. It takes a few weeks for the teachers to get just past the startup of the school year, but they start to notice staring spells, and they'll refer for that now. The teachers have been kind of sensitized to staring spells maybe being epilepsy, and then behavioral difficulties, ADD, get referred out. When you're told your kid has to be on methylphenidate in order to have them back in school. That's actually practicing medicine without a license, but nevertheless, they basically said go get a doctor's prescription for something to get the behavior better. And that sort of thing happens again a few weeks into the school year, and unfortunately, the number of people referred aren't as large as there actually is potential referrals. The number of kids in the school that need an EEG are far less than the ones that get an EEG. I would prefer seeing any child in a contact sport get an EEG ahead of time. You don't necessarily have to get it analyzed. You just have to have it looked at enough to make sure there's not a paroxysm, and then set it aside. If there's a head injury, now you've got a baseline, and it's an important concept to have a baseline EEG when you've had a head injury, because head injuries come in a wide variety of severity, gray matter, white matter, change of the spectral content. And if you've got a baseline EEG, you can end up identifying, where and how the brain has been altered. So, and you can provide a pathway back to better function using neurofeedback and other approaches that are used for that, hyperbaric and so forth.
Fantastic topic, Jay, for teacher in services. My experience in my own life, as well as the parents that I talk to and hear from, none of the teachers know any of that. None of the school staff, even the psychologist, knows that. And sadly, none of the pediatricians that are prescribing all this stuff take the EEG, the cardiac status, none of it into account before they write the prescription. They're looking at the behavioral stuff. I, for one, traditionally don't see a big bump in my practice until the first parent-teacher conference has happened.
Yeah.
The first report cards, yeah.
That's really good. But I mean, some good news in this as well, though, because Canada might be different than the U.S. Vancouver might be a little different than other cities as well. But we're seeing more and more individuals refer to neurotherapists now. A lot of parents really are not excited about the Mekrut. And the buzz is out, which is really, really good. So I think that's positive. And it's kind of like, okay, who are you taking your child to? If you take your child to a massage therapist when their back is sore, they're going to recommend massage. If you take them to a chiropractor, they're going to recommend chiropractic, surgery, et cetera, et cetera. But to loop on, I love, and I highly recommend, and I love, people's opinion. Well, I love seeing kids anywhere between the 4th and 6th week after school has started. Because new friends and no friends, behavior issues, getting the brain polished up again for learning, figuring out whether your teacher is a good match with you, all of these things will have kind of settled around that time. And Joy, as you said, that might just be a little bit before the first parent-teacher meeting, so you get a lot better information. You're not going to be dealing with adjustment or short adjustment issues. You'll have a really good idea whether somebody's missing their friends from a previous school, and have had a chance to kind of move into another social group, or whether there are behavioral social problems. So that for me is a really, really good time to bring a child in, because it's not too late to catch things, but you're going to, weed out the unnecessaries as well.
I have a cool story a friend just went through with her school-age daughter for ADHD and psychiatry and EEG. So they took the daughter to local psychiatrist, and she was prescribed Ritalin. And unfortunately, it did not address her ADHD, or if it did, it also worsened her behavior. So behavioral outbursts became more common. Well, this psychiatrist is the only one I'm aware of in our town who also provides EEG. And they seem to have somebody, I don't know him, but he seems competent. And he wrote the report suggests, he says, low generalized 7 to 12 hertz, the stimulant medication might remediate the theta and alpha, but it may have aggravated the beta component and caused anxiety. And so I don't know where she is on her treatment, but I felt like this story is like a pretty good. Oh, he also said that they had elevated activity from 23 to 30 hertz, and that they may want to look at her for something called binocular vision dysfunction, which I looked up, and apparently something like 7 to 9% of ADHD cases may be misdiagnosed BVD or binocular vision. So if anybody on the panel is familiar or wants to jump in.
I'll add to it, Anthony. Another
Sure.
piece that's often misdiagnosed is auditory processing. So the kid raises his hand and gives them the wrong answer.
Mhm.
And the teachers go, oh, you did that because you weren't paying attention. When the reality is the kid heard something completely different than what the teacher said.
Yeah.
So that gets misdiagnosed as well. And it will not respond to the stimulants either.
There we go. Mhm.
But
Yeah.
you can see
Or
that.
let's not just forget nothing fancy about the vision, just needing a pair of glasses.
But you,
Right.
you can see those things, you know, if as long as you don't just do an EEG, if you always do a CPT alongside it, then you can tease apart the auditory processing, the visual attention versus general attention. It kind of shows up. And so a lot of people, kids especially, come in with auditory processing issues, and the parents know they have one, but they got an ADHD diagnosis.
Mhm.
And you don't see the ADHD, you see the kid going, sorry, what? You know, as the primary mode of reacting to verbal instructions, because they have a mismatch in the two auditory sides, and there's a little half-second delay in turning both on.
Ready
So,
for a bad joke?
Sure.
Unless they're 14.
Oh. That's a whole other condition that I don't claim to do anything.
That's what I mean. That's right. Yeah, for everybody out there, a really fun, but very true
ADD,
advice.
ADHD.
Don't for adolescents.
ADD, ADHD is largely executive function frontal as a primary. I mean, there's other parts of the brain that can be involved on the individual, but the frontal lobes is also where the frontal eye fields are. And it's not what direction the E is pointing in the doctor's office. That's acuity. It's accommodation and convergence, the ability to focus the eyes and direct the eyes. And if the person's frontal lobe is not working well, they're going to have difficulty pointing their eyes at the page and working their way across the page to read. They're going to have visual processing difficulties because of the frontal eye fields difficulty. And the frontal eye fields, if you stimulate in a certain location in the frontal eye fields, you get visual deviation to look at. So the interaction between attention and accommodation convergence is that when something catches your attention, it also can catch your vision. So you can, spot and track threats. So it's adaptive if your attention is working. And if it's not working, you may have frontal eye field difficulties. I think CPTs are great, but I think a CPT with the EG recorded is called an event-related potential. And that's a very much better thing than just getting the CPT itself. Iva or Tova give you the behaviors, omission errors, commission errors, reaction time, variability. But you give that behavioral observation with the VCPT or any ERP. The good thing that you get in addition is that you can break down the event-related potential with a component analysis and literally see step by step by step the brain processing that information. Did you actually see it at an appropriate time? Did it hit the visual cortex at an appropriate time? Was it early and large? If it's early and large, you probably have an amygdala that's triggered with an emotion like anxiety or PTSD or something. So you get an early P100 and large P100. So you can see that not in the number of omission and commission errors, but by the arrival and size of the original signal in the cortex. But you also see the processing. So you can get auditory and visual processing disorders seen in the next component, the processing of that information. Then you see motor engagement, obviously the omission errors would be missing the motor engagement component. You get a stop component, the ability to actually inhibit a response. And then you get the anterior cingulate. Did my behavior match my model of what I think I should have been doing? And you can spot OCD people. They have a perfect CPT. I mean, no omissions, no commissions, great reaction time, low variability, but every time their anterior cingulate is saying, oops, oops, oops. So you lock the lock, you lock the lock, but you've got to check the lock, So your OCD hand washing is an error signal from the anterior cingulate. So if you get the CPT task and you only get the behavioral output, you may miss a lot of very meaningful pieces of the ERP, which can clue you into, what's really going on with the brain, not just the overt behavior. The CPT is a step up from just the behavioral diagnosis, but it's not quite there with the biomarker or physiological measurement. It is a step up from the classic you're hyperactive or inattentive and you have ADD. The CPT task ends up being a big step up from that. But having the ERP recorded ends up giving you really fine detail that can end up cluing you in on other things.
I think the CPT is useful as well because it picks up daily state variability in a way that the EEG shouldn't. When you do a QEEG properly, you should get a pretty stable Q day to day. But the performance testing is variable based on fatigue and stress. You can tease apart resources from states a little bit when you contrast the EEG and the CPT too, I think so.
Well, the ERP to the ERP, the EEG is a signal that disappears.
But I don't think the ERP, I mean, everything you described, I can see in endogenous waves and flat maps, everything. So I hear you. It's a useful tool for exploring, but it doesn't get me any better neurofeedback.
Yeah.
I can spot auditory processing, visual processing with, ongoing traces and or flat maps or an OCD mostly.
Yeah.
I can't tell what flavor of OCD is or the experience, but that's sort of one step beyond my job. I'm just trying to get to the phenomena and then try to push it around for people, not really get to the answer.
The quantitative analysis of the ERP has been done. Yuri Kropotov received the Russian Prize for Science for decomposing the ERP and its linkage to behavior. And he has a very nice book on biomarkers and psychiatry, focusing on the ERP.
Yeah. My dissertation was the ERP of neurofeedback.
I mean, Andrew, I think you're speaking to your knowledge and your experience, but I would say for the average person, seeing all that on the flat map would not be the case. So I think we need a nice qualifier going back to Joy's questions.
Well, I was just going to say the last 5 or 6, 8 minutes of this conversation, if I were a casual parent tuning into this, I would probably have no idea what you guys are talking about. Yeah, but I think the takeaway for the average parent, let's say you got your child, is having some struggles in school. You can see by this conversation just how complicated it is. Your pediatrician is going to go, oh, they have ADD. Here's some Ritalin. God, that is such an insufficient approach to an incredibly complicated conversation. Now, I'm not saying that anybody has to go out and do 15 million tests to help it, but more than just talking to a guy in an office who has limited skill set in all of the things we're talking about. I don't expect your pediatrician to understand the EEG. How could they? Most psychiatrists don't. But they hand out this medication as if it's some solution. It's only a part. It can be valuable. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I would like to help us think of ways we as neurofeedback clinicians could help the parents. And one of the ways I have found to be tremendously helpful is, after that first parent-teacher conference, my personal learning was I was told from the schools that they don't really report a lot of the stuff until towards the end of 2nd grade. And that's when the teachers start going, yeah, this is consistently a problem. And so in 3rd grade, they start referring them for the school's testing and stuff like that. And then the parents get introduced for the first time to something called an IEP plan. Different places. The individual education plan. Okay. I went through that. It was how I discovered that this was not going to be a team effort, that the end result was going to be tug of war with them holding one of my son's arms and me holding the other.
Yeah.
And they tried very hard to discombobulate me with their knowledge and their words and everything else. And I often do not use my 5-syllable words in those circumstances because I want everybody to understand. But by the time they did hear some of them, the school principal came to me and said, "What do you do for a living?" So let me share what I discovered to be something that was incredibly helpful. These poor parents have no clue for any of it. They're the school, the doctor, they're just wanting to help their
Joy,
kid.
can I interrupt and just add something before you continue? I have a term that I use, and I call it's heavy weighted. I call it manufacturing disability. Okay, when you have noticed that a child has a learning difficulty, it's not a deficit yet. And what you do then is scrape away and provide them with a new set of rules of everything they don't need to do and everything they don't need to learn. You go from learning difficulties to learning disabilities very, very frequently. And I think that's where we all hop in. And yet don't be a participant in the manufacturing of disability because it assists with classroom management. I just want to interject that because Joy, you were moving on to something else. So please hop back on the train. I'll get off.
Well, I
100%, Mari. 100%.
Right there. So the IEP, it's where they explain to the parents what they see their child's problems are and what degree of improvement they need to see by a certain date. I got to the point where I routinely told these women, you would have flunked out of nursing school. None of you would have made it. You can't write a care plan like this, not telling me what you're going to do. And that's an IEP. But what I discovered was, first of all, they get scared to death when they find out I'm going to come to the meeting. They don't even know who I am. Okay, so there's that. They don't want you there because it disrupts them. So I learned, you listen to every one of the team members, what they contribute first, take a notepad with you, and have the child's QEEG with you in bright, colorful print. I have discovered it takes anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes to give a group of teachers the most rudimentary understanding. See the colors? These are the kinds of things that are associated with those things. You don't insult them because the kid's going to be in their class and the parents are worried about that. But perfect example, I listened to the situation. I'm already working neurofeedback with this child, and the parents come in tears one day because the child has come home from school and they said, get her on medication, get her on medication. I'm like, okay, well, they didn't listen. The child had tried medication. It was a failure. It was a mess. Okay. So one of the things I knew from her QEG and backed up with symptoms, she had real auditory processing difficulties. And they are, by value of their testing, saying she has poor memory problems. So I very politely pointed out the area of the auditory cortex, auditory processing center is over here, and you see her findings over here. They're abnormal. Okay. So may I ask you a question? When you were giving her the test, did she seem to remember the wrong things, or did she just have no memory at all? Oh, no, all of her answers were wrong. I said, but she answered every time. Oh, yes. I said, is there any chance that if she thought she heard you say a different word, she never put your word into her memory, and then you think she's got a problem with memory? Well, the end of these things usually ends up helping the group of teachers discover a new set of modifications to work with these children. And everybody leaves happy. The teachers want to do a good job. They want their students to succeed. The parents want everybody off their back, and everybody leaves happy when you can help point out to them what modifications might be worth their time. Yeah. It's an invaluable.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if anybody else comes from a teaching background. I mean, I have my teacher's certification, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, in all honesty, this goes back a long long time, maybe 25 years. But, I was appalled at the time. I mean, I already had a little bit of a foot in neurotherapy that, the way teachers are taught to look at learning disabilities. Again, there's this chasm between difficulties and disabilities. And I do not see enough of a focus on difficulties and how to help with difficulties. But piggybacking what Joy said is, how to pull the teachers along. It's not their fault. I mean, most people do not get into the field of education, like most people do not get into the field of medicine because they don't want to help people, right? It's just in terms of the tools that people have been taught. Educators are not taught about neurotherapy. Okay, most medical schools do not teach about neurotherapy, right? And so this is where the pharmaceutical comes in. My question, of course, is where do teachers get their information? As Jay was saying, yes, you are practicing out of scope if you recommend methylphenidate as a teacher. But what's happening in the teacher education nowadays to really help them be bridge makers to facilitate the help that children actually need? And I think that's where we really, really need to insert ourselves in. One of the things I used to do, not so much now, COVID kind of screwed up everything and it hasn't been picked back up, but the parent advisory groups, go out and talk to them, and the teacher professional development days. I've done some from colleges, I've done some for schools. And they're hungry. They're really, really hungry to learn. So when I have a positive captive audience, meaning that people are there because they want to be there for anywhere from 45 minutes to a whole afternoon, people are eager to learn. So we've got to get our message out there.
Mari, could some of this be due, and I'm not a parent, so I've had parents tell me, though, that if you can get certain diagnoses or certain, I don't know if it's a learning disability, what have you, there's special privileges you can get. I even had a parent tell me that in Florida, you can get like a $10,000 grant a year if you can get certain diagnoses. And so could there be an incentive, maybe from a teacher's perspective, if they have you labeled a certain way, maybe you get extra help somehow. I'm just curious of how that.
Well, unfortunately, you are 100% correct, and this is a discussion that I have far too frequently. As a psychologist, I can diagnose, and I say, like, what do you need the diagnosis for? If you want me to work with your child and essentially train their brain in sufficient enough a way that the quote unquote symptoms and disabilities are not negative or debilitating, you do not need a diagnosis. In fact, I highly recommend you don't have one, because once it's in a school's a child's school record, it's public knowledge. You don't own that anymore. But when a class can get anywhere from 1,000 to, in Canada, of early autism diagnosis, you get $20,000. Okay. And many of the schools are vying for these diagnoses because the school gets the money. Now, you have to be really careful about who's the bad guy here and who's the good guy here, or the bad gal or the good gal. In terms of, like, if you do get a certain diagnosis and the school gets $1,000 or $2,000, where does that money go? Okay, does it go for that child to have an aide? Does it go for the classroom to have a teaching assistant, or does it just go into the pot of the school? These are all questions parents need to ask. Why is my child getting this diagnosis? What is the purpose of the diagnosis? Or are they getting their individual education plan, quote unquote, only? Now,
somebody want to read some of these questions, starting with.
You don't want me to finish my rant there, Pete?
You can. I just, the customers are waiting for drinks.
You just have questions.
I like Craig's comment about the IEP and special ed class. My personal story is my own daughter. who I fought with the LA School District innumerable times, went to innumerable IEP meetings. We sued them twice. And all I kept saying was, you're going to provide what I am asking for. This isn't an IEP meeting. Why are you forcing me to hire a lawyer who now you are going to have to pay? I would rather not hire the lawyer. Let's just work this out. I'll just give you this as a sidebar. You're going to pay her $30,000. She's driving a Mercedes. I'm not, because you're paying her to defend me from your lunacy. And at the end of the day, I will take this all the way out, and I did, and of course I won, and they paid to the lawyer. You could have taken that $30,000 and put it in the classroom. What's wrong with you people? The construct around IEPs and the way we manage our educational system, it's a factory, and these kids have to fit into a factory model of performance. You know, you're 7 years old, you got to sit on a square for 30 minutes. It's not realistic. It's stupid. There's no room for flexibility around, and the poor teachers. Craig is commenting on, there's 30 kids in a classroom. What did you expect these people to do? Of course, they're looking for behavioral control and management. Of course, their knowledge base around it is going to be recommended medication. I get it. But can't we change that paradigm and come up with something a little more interesting? I refused to send my daughter to a special ed class. I just flat out refused. I said, I'll see you in court. It's not going to happen. And that was their answer, because she didn't fit their little tiny frame of performance that they were asking of her. And a special ed class, I went and visited. I was courteous. Let me go look. I said, this is not the environment for my daughter. There's nonverbal children in here. There's children with, all kinds of physical challenges. Great place for them. They're going to get the attention that they need in that environment. My daughter is capable of fitting into a system. You have to change the system to accommodate her. I don't have to accommodate your system. And that's the net result of IEP. Craig, I'm sure, is going to agree with what I just said.
Look, you've actually hit the nail on the head, John. The system is so far behind. So far behind. We talk about going in and giving in services and stuff. Their heads are going to spin if we start talking about the stuff we talk about. They don't even have a foundation for this stuff. I had a similar experience with my son and IEPs and the frustration level and the stuff that they'll do. My son had a horrible monster for a teacher in 4th grade. And I went to the school fairly soon. I said, he needs a different teacher. He needs a different teacher. He needs a different teacher. And, these meetings happen during the daytime when moms go. So I took it certain far and I said, that's it. My husband, you're going with the next one. And on the drive over there, I picked and picked and picked all the sore spots that I knew would make him angry. It had nothing to do with my son. It was very deliberate. I wanted him good and worked up and angry when he walked into the It was extremely useful, very successful outcome. But why did I have to resort to that instead of talking to these people and saying, let's work as a team? But
that's brilliant. I never heard that story from you before. That's marvelous.
Can somebody answer Grace's question?
Guys, Talabo and Grace have a question. Well, Talabo's is more towards what we've been talking about, and then we'll do Grace. Talabo says, if a child has ADHD/autism and needs mind-eye visual rehabilitation, does NF help with that?
Sure, quite a lot.
Frontal eye field
specifically, and it'll bring up plasticity broadly. So the work you're doing with speech and language and vision will actually land harder and change more. And you can then regulate the brain on top of that in all the other ways. Because with that complaint, you're going to have more than just that phenomenon. There's all kinds of subtle things. So you can regulate broadly while bringing up plasticity. So everyone else working with your kid goes, wow, things are changing so fast.
Yeah, I think the big thing to recognize is neurotherapy potentiates everything, because essentially you're conditioning the brain to facilitate change. It's as simple as that. Do you want to take that down into lay language?
It's even simpler than that, Dr. Swingle. It's even simpler. The one single session of neurofeedback has a measurable change in plasticity as measured by a motor evoked potential. But you can measure one session causing a change in cortical plasticity. It makes it more likely to change. So
very interesting. Well, Grace had a question here too. Oh, if Jay has an answer, please continue.
So we spoke about alpha suppression training, which is used commonly now. Ruth Lennius uses alpha suppression training for PTSD and trauma cases. And somebody was wondering about alpha doesn't actually go away. They suppress it, but it doesn't end up going away. What's the deal? Well, they're training control. So when you're done with the training, you have control. Now, the question here is that if you have control, does it matter whether you go, you leave it up or down, in what position you're in? In fact, in Germany, when they trained slow cortical potentials, they trained control, make it go higher and lower and higher and lower and higher and lower. And when you were done showing good control, they would tell you what polarity was therapeutic for you. And for epilepsy, going electropositive, turning off the cortex to stop the seizure, ends up being what you wanted to learn. But for ADD up front, you need to turn it on. So electronegative would be what you needed. So they would train control. And once you learned control, they would tell you the therapeutic endpoint for you would be one polarity or the other. And it does matter if you're training slow cortical potentials. Up or down, positive and negative are very different states. Once you've learned control of your alpha, you're going to have some. How much of it you want to make is up to you at that point.
Alpha special, you can't do that with other brain waves. You can't do that with theta or beta. You can do it with alpha, you can do it with SCP or infraslow even, but they're regulatory phenomena that have so much pressure to keep them in a narrow range that when you push on them, they push back. Theta and beta are much more localized and create a change in the direction you train them, and they do not rebound. So you cannot get away with exercising theta in the wrong direction or beta the wrong direction. It'll stick. So a big piece of what you said, Jay, I think boils down to, well, where, in what tissue, in what circuit, because it's really different across different frequencies and parts of the brain.
And quite honestly, alpha up and down is less often the problem than alpha faster and slower. The tuning of alpha being wrong is more commonly the error than the size. Size is easy to train, but teaching somebody to speed up or slow down the alpha changes their entire arousal level. And it's an important thing to gain control over.
And Craig has a real practical question I see here about being touchy and sensitive about the sensors and everything else. Okay, Craig, I would consider myself something of an expert at this.
Are you using a staple gun like I am? That was a joke. That was a joke. Anybody listen?
And I laughed.
Right. That's a nail gun. To have an empty one hand by where they can see it, also a joke. But okay. So in 1996, a family came to me with a severely autistic child, 8 years old. And they said, does neurofeedback do anything for this? I immediately called my mentor, Sue Hoffman, and I said, does neurofeedback help with this? I don't know. She goes, maybe sort of some stuff. I'm like, okay, it's worth a shot. And at that moment in time, I'm still learning a lot. And I told this family, look, I don't know if this is going to help or not, but I really don't think it'll hurt him. So by method of learning, I'm going to do your sessions for free. I felt like we're not working in known territory here. Sue couldn't direct me to anybody who was working with autism at the time. And I went, let's try it. Craig, okay, first of all, do not expect someone who has sensory integration and tactile sensitivity and all this stuff to just be willing to have paste and sensors put on their head. Ridiculous. Okay, but most of us, if we do, I have a pile of old electrodes. If anybody wants them, I'm happy to mail them to you. You send those home. Ear clips, sensors, and you don't go anywhere near the child with them. Mom and dad wear them around the house for a while.
Or the EEG cap, a broken cap is great to send home. So dad gets to wear it for a few days, and then suddenly, is it my turn?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's for you to introduce it to their house where they're familiar. And it's like, Dad, why? And, right? So
buy a simple package of Q-tips if you don't have them, and put stuff on the Q-tips. I mean, a really fun one, it could get a bit gooey, is just do it with jam. Okay. It can be kind of funny. Other toothpaste also has a little bit of this, if you don't want to give them any of the new prep or whatnot, it has that mild abrasive, and you can just kind of play with putting toothpaste on their ears and have a few giggles. I also recommend they go to a dollar store and get a little, the clip-on earrings, and play. Obviously I'm talking about jam and toothpaste, depends on the personality of the child and how quickly this can get out of hand, but they're very familiar substances that are cold and fun, and just goof around with all of those sensations. The other thing that we used to do is we would use a little bit of pressure acupuncture, okay, so that the tapping point here to just quiet a child can be very helpful. And sometimes also, I mean, the glasses, trying to put glasses on a child with a quieting light protocol. You can also get lamps that will flash a little bit so it's not on the child. So there are a lot of things that you can do to kind of complement. But yeah, one electrode at a time, your broken equipment. Yeah. So we've all been there.
I often don't do neurofeedback too when the person's really extreme. I was trained by Larry Hirschberg, who's really autistic, spectrum focused. Initially, that's all my work. Really, sometimes quite severe autism, nonverbal, people screaming and stimming, and you're just not going to get a brain map done ever on this person. And, if someone's got seizures or obvious phenomena, you may need to or want to try to jump in with some training. But what I found, this is one of the reasons I do this now as techniques, is that I have other biofeedback techniques are much more achievable with movement, with sensory. So you can do HRV, you can do HEG, FNIRS style, or passive infrared. And movement isn't a big deal because you're not creating an artifact in the signal. And you can get somebody used to sort of being manipulated and poked and prodded, come into the office, look at the game on the screen with a simple ear clip with no paste for HRV, or a simple headband with no paste for HEG. And another big trick for folks that have some significant challenges is find the thing they care about. If they want, I can't tell you the number of times I've watched the first 25 minutes of Shrek because of when the HEG system was produced. We had those movies and everyone watched the first 25 minutes in their session. So you can funnel the rewards into something that's going to capture the attention of people that have a little bit of quirky brains, and that can work around it, and then avoid doing the really adversive work until they've eased into it.
Work with what you've got. I mean, again, I'm talking about 25, 27 years ago, but I mean, in that day, we would just, we would get only the information off of CZ or C4, and then just do some quieting protocols, as simple as that. The other thing is anybody who works with children, like what I affectionately call the wiggly pigglies, like the real ADHD kids, underline H, okay, and as was being said, individuals with the strong rocking and flapping with autism, I work with dirty data, okay, and essentially your artifact is a variable, okay, and you notice when your artifact starts to come down, when your data starts to get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. As long as you acknowledge that, I don't have an issue. What I have an issue with is if you're training, quote unquote, the artifact. Training EMG, that's different, but training the artifact. But in some, there's so much that can be done with people who have the experience. I think that's the big one.
Talibu reminded me to do our disclaimer that she has a question. Or was it? Wait, hold on. Where did she put it? Listen to you guys. I'm terrified of sending my kiddo to public school. We are homeschooling now until next year. Talibu, just a reminder, this is for informational entertainment purposes only. Please check with your primary care physician first. Continue.
Well,
Okay,
I'm going to give a shout out to teachers before. I mean, it's really, really easy to criticize. It's really easy to see the bigger picture that isn't working. But I mean, there are jewels of people out there, and we do get a lot of referrals also from teachers and parent to parent, and then the teacher will inquire, "Hey, what's going on with this child?" So I think it's also just a matter of larger education and also recognizing, what the heck do you expect? One person in front of 30 children trying to get them all to focus on the same lesson? I mean,
In the same way?
yeah, people need a lot of not just sympathy, empathy, and support, and just kind of looping around. I don't think we need aides. We need more teachers in smaller classrooms. And I'd say that's kind of almost an international problem now.
Well, to that point, Mari, I had the good fortune here in Los Angeles. I don't know if it exists anywhere else. There's a school out in Woodland Hills. It's an inclusion model, K through 8. There are 20% of the children in the school have an IEP, 80% neurotypical. There are 2 teachers in every classroom. One is a general ed teacher. The other is a special ed teacher. They pride themselves on including people with, I'm talking severe challenges, nonverbal, wheelchair bound. I mean, kids with some very, very difficult issues, all in the same classroom.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me emotional to think about it, because it was such a beautiful experience. I have one daughter on the spectrum, who knows anymore, and the other daughter is a gifted kid. They both went to the same school, obviously different grades, but they went to the same school, and it accommodated both of them. They had highly gifted kids. They had kids who had, assistive technology to communicate, and everybody was in the same classroom being taught by the same teachers. It was brilliant. Please, Talibu, look in your local community. See if something like that can exist. It may not be in a public school environment. Maybe it's private, but maybe there's something where you can find, because homeschooling, in my opinion, has its limitations. The social construct around engagement with other peers is really, really, not your family, is really important. And I think a lot of homeschool kids miss that. They try to make up with it with various strategies. I understand. But there is something about the experience of going to school that I think is valuable for a lot of folks. There was another great question that came up here earlier that I wanted to talk about. Microcurrent neurofeedback. Microcurrent is not neurofeedback. That's all I have to say.
Well, let's say one more thing, because people are always wondering about equipment. This is the common question we get, which we don't love that question about what equipment, but it is important to know that this particular product is one of 5 or 6 products that are all essentially identical, and they have different brand names, but they're all versions of something called Lens, L-E-N-S. So IASIS, Direct, Clarity, HPN, and there's at least one more.
Yeah.
But if it's microcurrent, it's a version of Lens. So go look at all the literature and people practicing and education around Lens and see if that makes you satisfied. If it does, then IASIS will be fine. But you're not operating in a traditional landscape of neurofeedback, as I think John pointed out.
Yet they have co-opted the phrase, to my consternation. Lens neurofeedback. I'm sorry, it's inherent in the word. Lens. But consumers don't know the difference. Yeah, I did neurofeedback. What'd you do? I don't know, this thing, and whatever they describe it, and I go, it sounds like a stimulation technology, what you're describing. You did a 12-minute session? I don't think that's neurofeedback. I'm gonna be honest with you. But they don't know. Consumers do not know.
Yeah, there's no feedback. There's got to be feedback somewhere.
As a parent, Tabo, I think the main thing you need to start your search with is those techniques put current into the head.
Yeah.
Neurofeedback.
Or claim to. I think that's still an open question.
Well.
Seriously, like the electronics, the electricity, the physics involved don't make sense. And there is some suggestion that we're not actually doing current, like the way that's described, it shouldn't work to get current into the brain the way they described the technology. So there's a few technologies in our field that are elaborate. This is one of them, and that I'm just like, really, because kind of breaks down when I think about how it should work. I'm kind of confused about how it could work.
So
I mean, it creates
super
effect.
small currents are not sufficient to create an action potential. They can potentiate activity, but they don't initiate activity. If you create a gigantic bell, the normal way to ring a bell is to have a big clanger that hits it, and that will ring the bell.
TMS.
If you have a little tiny padded mallet that the drummer would normally use, if you hit the bell with that, it doesn't ring the bell. You might hear a little thump, but it doesn't ring the bell. But if you tap the bell at the right frequency, the bell will become a ringing bell. So the frequency of the super small currents end up being important. You can entrain, again, facilitate content, but you can't create content. So it's the currents are so small that the government approved the device thinking it couldn't have an effect. But they're looking for the effect of a clanger.
I want to pause on that comment.
But it does have an effect. I get people every week that have side effects from microcurrent stim.
Yeah.
Every week, someone comes in and says, "Oh my God, I'm chronically anxious. I can't sleep again. What would happen?" I did this thing called
the
neurofeedback.
Right frequency at the right spot in order to have it work. And a lot of times the people working with it don't even understand that.
Yeah.
So it's doing something.
Anyway, the microcurrent can have an effect. It's just not the classic effect like a clanger will ring a bell. This is more like the soft mallet hitting the right frequency to create the ring. You can potentiate the outcome, but you can't create it. So,
John, do we want to jump in and have our little convo here in terms of who should be doing this? Because this is definitely experimental. Who should be and who shouldn't be, and how transparent they need to be.
If you're in New York,
was lens restricted for a long time just to medical?
If you're in New York and you do microcurrent stimulation, you need to be a medical doctor because they will arrest you as a psychologist for practicing medicine without a license. Well, they'll charge you. They won't come in, arresting, but you're going to get busted for it. And they've legally challenged people's ability to use lens in the state of New York. There may be other locations that have restrictions on who can pass currents into the client, but New York saw it as not the role of a psychologist to be passing currents into a person. And as such, they ruled it outside the licensure of a psychologist to do such a thing. And it's not part of a psychology license to do neurofeedback either. It's a technique that you need to have expertise in. Like a medical doctor, you have a license to be a medical doctor, but you need to have competency in the techniques that you're using. And neurofeedback is a technique you're going to have competency in. And if you've got the right license, passing currents into somebody may be a permissible thing as well.
Joy John.
Jeez, Jay, I had no idea about that in New York because it's a different landscape here in LA. My goodness, I met somebody, a practitioner doing client work with somebody at a lens facility who had no training at all.
Yep, same up here.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense.
And
it's stepping back.
Neurofeedback, so yeah.
Right, exactly. But if you're exogenously doing something to someone, you'd think that would have a higher level of scrutiny than a training exercise. Look what we do. Is a behavioral training. It should be done by a doctor.
Well, I mean, all agree to this. We've got this huge loophole in all of the systems, which means if you have the proper license or proper qualifications in one other category, you are going to get your head chopped off if you do something in another classification or with equipment that isn't equipment, et cetera, et cetera. But if your name is Susie Q and you sell shoes, you can buy whatever piece of equipment and do whatever, and nobody's going to come after you. I mean, it's a major, major issue. Up here, if you do dentistry and you're not a dentist, they're going to come get you. But if you do neurotherapy and you have no training, or you do lens and you have no training, they're not going to come get you.
Well, okay, Mari, I'm gonna offer some more thoughts on that. First of all, there is no such thing as a license in neurofeedback.
Yeah,
we have to attempt to establish that in every state. I don't see anybody ever taking that one on. Okay.
Yeah. So, well, you have a history here. You know the battles. Yeah.
Well, what we stipulate, California has some kind of a something or other. Jay probably knows it because what's his face used to rely on all the time.
And in fact, there's a non-licensed practitioner for alternative healthcare in California.
AB 2023.
You have to openly state what your qualifications are, but if you're an alternative healthcare practitioner, you can practice your alternative healthcare practice in California. Now, if you pretend you're a doctor, you're going to get busted. There's no way around that. But if you state who you are, what you are, and everything, you can practice in California doing neurofeedback. There's no licensure required, but you have to end up being you have to state your presence as an alternative healthcare practitioner, and you can't misstate your qualifications.
Yeah. I would love to take a moment and talk about alternative. Sorry?
You cannot, in the United States, you cannot buy neurofeedback equipment that's FDA cleared, the class 2 medical device. You cannot buy that.
We have all these wellness products now. There are only a few that are actually have that's the issue. But can I just actually, we have two really important points at the top of the hour, but what I would love to just interject is the difference between alternative and experimental. Okay. Alternative is a term I despise. I think it came out of a good place, but it's just so bastardized. I would say to anybody, run as fast as you can away from anything alternative. Experimental is extremely positive, because in order to get anything evidence-based, well, hello, you have to do some experimental. But you want to do your experimental with people who are properly trained, know the risks and benefits, can communicate them to people, so you have what we call informed choice. Nobody wants to be a guinea pig, but to participate in things that are experimental, I think is fantastic, because chances are you could be on the forefront of some incredible things, but you got to know your stuff. Joy, do you want to loop back to what you were saying about the equipment there? Because it's the same stuff. Everybody is using wellness products now. I mean, generally speaking, I mean, I would say up until just a few years ago, everything we had was Health Canada approved or FDA. But a lot of like stuff that I would never touch doesn't have that. But there are also some reputable people that are not bothering to get the stamps on the equipment now, which I find a bit concerning. But it's so expensive and it takes so much time. And we're going into a soup market again.
How's everybody doing on time? Again, Irish goodbye. You can split anytime. I'll stick around, whatever. I'm meeting John and Anthony later. So
yeah, I've got around 5 minutes. But I think this is a really important topic. I would love somebody else to support me, contradict me, what have you, because I think we're at the meat of the issue in our discipline.
Mari, to your point, I think the simple thing comes down to this. This is what our public needs to get educated about.
Yeah.
If you're going to go out and spend $300 and you can train your own brain, you are not working with a class 2 medical device. I can guarantee it. Okay. So that alone should stand out to them. Now you know that this is, not for, first of all, it's not for diagnosable conditions.
Let me advocate some devils here, Joy, just for a second. So most people could not do this. They would have many, many problems getting this done. But you can buy an open EEG, open source hardware device for about $100. You can get open EEG software for free. You can roll your own neurofeedback program.
That's the scary part.
It is really hard. And here's the thing, doesn't matter. Doing neurofeedback, learning how to do neurofeedback is not hard. Knowing what to do in neurofeedback is really hard. So I don't really care that I'm using a non-FDA approved pocket amp or a Neurobics, a Neurobit amp from in my European offices, because the amp is not the important part. It's what we're doing with the stuff. I mean, the software I use is 510K certified and FDA. It's it's a medical software, but I could do really good neurofeedback with really bizarre tools if they measured signals, did filtering, had parameters, did rewards, and I wouldn't care too much, because I know lots of people using FDA cleared high-end tools who don't do good neurofeedback.
And Andrew, I'm just interjecting, and that is exactly the problem, right? You have people who really know their stuff that can use other non-checked or non-approved equipment because they know what they're doing, and that gets transferred to the individuals who don't. So we are at the crux of the issue in our discipline.
Information will out though, Mary. We're never going to move backwards. We're always going to have cheaper tech, more access of measurement, easier stuff to, we're always going to have more access in this landscape. We're never going to, our parents didn't look at their blood lipids when they were in their 20s. It never happened. Now we're like, oh crap, better back off on the Ben and Jerry's. Like, it's agency we're giving people. And I will fight tooth and nail. I'll die on this hill. We always want the software and hardware to be more accessible. Always. Because right now, that's the big problem.
Andrew Hill is going to die on the hill.
I'll die on this hill.
Andrew, would you consider it fair then? Would you consider it fair to say, because I agree with you. It's knowing how to put it to use. And in that little kernel also contains your ability to interpret the quality of the data that you're working with.
But no hardware and software gives me that ability.
If you're not familiar with what a good EEG signal looks like, I see it all the time in here. It's like, that's an EEG, right? I'm like, no. But but they don't know. So here's the problem. The public as such, you and I are both doing our best on Reddit, but the deal is these people are like, oh, I'm going to do this, and I bought this, and I got this for $300, and they're all proud of that. And then they get to the part where they go, but I don't know what to choose. So, and I would also bring forward the what to choose is a very small part of it as well. I can tell you, it doesn't take me more than 5 minutes to teach somebody, put the electrode at C3. Can we have a Zoom call? I can show you how to do it. Okay. But I can't tell you how to set the thresholds so that the learning is maximized. I can't, not in all fairness.
Or more importantly, what to do next after you get a certain impact from a protocol. That is the hardest thing in neurofeedback, is the what to do next question, or what to do when you aren't getting the effects you're looking for. It fits the ideas. It's what I was taught by my mentor. It fits the brain maps, and the person's reporting something completely different.
Right.
That is an art in reconciling someone's physiology to their goals in some ways. And
it's science and an art combined, like anything. A good medical practitioner is a scientist and an artist. I'd say we all are. Anybody who knows their stuff, it's an art, right?
So everybody had their say. Go ahead, Joy.
That's the message for the public. It's that it isn't as simple as knowing where to stick the sensors and how to plug it in. Sorry.
Yeah. If I had to have FDA approval for protocols when I started, there wouldn't have been anything.
Well, that's what we're talking about, experimental, though, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
you weren't going, let's pin the tail on the head and see what happens.
We had informed consent, and we had information release forms. And the informed consent form and the research release form are two separate forms, or they're coercive. So you have to offer the treatment and then ask for their consent to release. If they deny the consent to release, you still have to treat them. So, but there was no efficacy for anything in 1972. There was people doing alpha and some alpha theta stuff, and there was some SMR. There wasn't really any real efficacy proof of anything at that point. So everything we were doing was really experimental. And the work we did with alpha training in alcoholics in 1972 to 75 predated Peniston by over a decade. And we actually wrote a grant to NIH for alpha training in alcoholics in 1974, but it was denied. They didn't. They in 1972, after a very bad piece of research, they quit funding anything in neurofeedback. But the bad piece of research was basically they said they did alpha training, they could show no learning curve, and then they concluded that alpha training had no effect. But if you train something ineffectively and it doesn't have an effect, it's your training that's the problem, not the use of alpha. So anyway, we didn't get anything covered, but
out on. Yeah, I think that I love that. It's not, if you're not doing something right, it doesn't mean it didn't work. It means you weren't doing something right. Yeah.
Did everybody get out of their system now? We feel cleansed. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good.
I am.
So just to make sure, everybody send me your contact information. We got a predominantly West Coast contingency and some Canada here. So I get people asking me all the time, where can I find somebody? And on the West Coast, I know a few people, and in Canada, I know a few people. So, Joy,
yeah, I work anywhere in the world.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Remote
countries or something. So
yeah. Andrew, Anthony, Dr. Marie Swingle. Hey, thanks, and all the Talibou and Craig and all our friends that popped up. Hey, thanks for showing up, and see you next week. And I'm going to go work on my interior singlet over in Vegas. Take care, all.
Okay.
Bye-bye.